This is 665.66 AM UHMR Under Hive ChemRat Radio, broadcasting from sub-level 99 right next to the old corpse starch factory.
Radio Underground.
Welcome to Under the Hive of Madness. I am Ryan, the Goblin King, and today I am joined by my co-host, Marky.
Feeling good. What's going on, everybody?
The voice of ChemRat Radio, Beast.
What's going on there, Playboy?
And just back from the ash wastes of Armageddon, we have our special guest, Kevin.
Greetings, comrades.
Rising like a phoenix
From the ashes.
Ashes.
This is... This is part 2 of our 3-part series, which aims to cover a brief history of the Warhammer 40k timeline. We are focusing on the events between M40 and M42, but we will have a couple of callbacks to earlier events in the timeline as we get into the gritty details. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go ahead and hit that pause button. Go on back to part 1, listen to the whole thing. And when your ear holes are nice and ready, come on back here to pick up part 2.
Or don't. Listen to it in whatever order you want.
Yeah, or just jump in the middle.
Hey, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Who cares?
Yeah, it's your life.
Eyeballs and ears.
That's right. In the 40k timeline, the warp messes with time on the regular, which is a very cool aspect of the setting and lore, since it can be used very easily when it comes to writing short fiction or your own homebrew lore. When I set out designing the Skeldmare worlds, my own homebrew subsector of the Warhammer 40k universe, I use this concept of lost history in order to write the function of most of the races, human and Xenos, that exist there. Tom, you just spoke to us about your knights not too long ago, and I know that you played with the idea of your household being lost in the warp for a substantial amount of time.
Sure did.
So yeah, that's definitely something that can happen. You guys, as you're looking at playing with timelines and any of that stuff when you're writing your own home lore?
I haven't really dabbled too much in the warp for like my Gene Stealer cult lore, and I haven't really had a reason for my Death Watch, so not too much dabbling.
You haven't played with time at all?
No, not too much.
Gotcha.
Yeah, time not so much a factor for mine. Like the warp and warp travel is definitely part of it, but not specifically the time aspects of it.
Gotcha. Well, for those of you out there, listeners of ours that are looking for a reason to kind of justify something, definitely, as Tom and I both mentioned, we mess with time stuff a little bit with our own lore, and there's definitely some tips and tricks within those tiny bits to kind of bring in the idea that you want to bring in and play around with the idea that time is loosey-goosey, if you want to put it that way.
Well, it's a really good tool. If you're trying to make something that is, not necessarily fitting in, being able to adjust the timeline like that is pretty helpful, from what I've found. But that's really only if you're dealing with something that you're having a very hard time trying to get it to fit. Death Watch, Imperial Guard, it's pretty easy to slide them into a lot of things. Same thing with Gene Stealers. When you're dealing with like ancient type of armies like Tyranids or Necrons especially, that's where it's really going to come into play, and that's where you can really play around with it and give yourself some ins and outs on writing your lore.
Yeah, so it's something that you can throw into your, as we kind of go over this stuff and talk about some of the inconsistencies and why they exist, just sort of put it in your back pocket. Know that it's in your toolbox, but you don't have to rely on it. Because of this, the 40k timeline is often filled with time and date inconsistencies, and this has led to a loose set of events in the Imperium that is referred to as the Chronos Strife. This is basically where the Imperium of Man's record keeping is such a hot, distorted mess that it's caused an ongoing conflict within a specific Ordos of the Inquisition called the Ordos Chronos. The Ordos Chronos, for those of you playing Inquisition Bingo, is one of those smaller Ordos that we had mentioned a couple of episodes back. And in brief, its members are focused on time warping effects along with time keeping, as far as the official Administratum records are concerned. However, in the Indominus era, There has been a resurrection of the now Lord Commander of the Imperium and Primarch of the Ultramarines, Reboot Gilliman, and he has ordered a more accurate accounting of the Imperium's often confusing and contradictory historical record. Part of Gilliman's belief is that this will help humanity advance out of the darkness and stagnation that has eclipsed the Imperium in the millennium since the Horus Heresy.
Yeah, good luck.
To accomplish this task, Gilliman formed the Logos Historica Ventra and personally trained each of its members to look at time and record keeping from an objective data collection and verification stance. This organization has been tasked with combing through, collecting, and verifying the literal thousands of years of human written history, most of which is inaccurate due to either superstition, suppression, propaganda, or outright obfuscation by the High Lords of Terra.
Shenanigans.
No, the
Right,
commissar
man.
told me everything that I read is real.
Listen good.
Further complicating this task was the loss of the Imperium's standard calendar, which occurred sometime after the Great Crusade. This is another symptom of the religiously dogmatic propaganda and technological stagnation of the Imperium, or simply just short-sighted revisionism. Multiple rival calendars had grown up all over the galaxy during the millennia since the heresy, which has even further complicated matters when it came to organizing any of the events. As the Indominus Crusade comes closer to a resolution and what has been approximately determined to be 111.M42, Gilliman's efforts have determined it is somewhere between the 41st and 42nd millennium. So where a rogue trader might use a more archaic Terran-centric calendar to record an event way out on the eastern fringe, the 431st Cadian Regiment might be using a complete different standard. This is what gave that slip of, wait, what millennia are we in?
Yeah, it's funny. It sure is nice to narrow it down between a millennium.
Somewhere in this
Somewhere
1,000
in this
years.
1,000 years, I think we are. Yeah, real good job.
Somewhere in
Good
there.
job, Gilliman. Glad you're back.
It's
And the
also-
sad thing is,
Thanks for answering my question about the calendar. Really wanted that answered.
the sad thing is like that's the best they could come up with.
Yeah, right?
Like they tried so hard, and they're like, yeah.
Hey guys, they've only been working at it for a couple hundred years, okay?
Like,
Right.
give them another 1,000, and they might have it narrowed down to 500 years.
It feels like a couple hundred years like means nothing in the 40k universe.
Yeah, the timeline is so massive and the events that happen take place over such a great stretch that a lot of times how we perceive time being, humans that only live like 80 to 90 years, it's unimaginable.
On a good day.
It's kind of like the size of the galaxy and what you can do when you're writing your lore. The galaxy is so fucking big.
Well, I mean, and also, too, you got to think about the theory of relativity.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
You know,
100%.
What 10 minutes on this planet
What's
is
that?
7 years over on this planet.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
Learned that from Interstellar. Shout out. Shout out to Interstellar.
The closer you are to them warp anomalies, the different time I
Right.
move.
Shout out to my man, Matthew McConaughey. All right.
It's also important to note that while the Emperor's goal had been to forge a lasting secular empire, the current Imperium is a pale shadow of that dream. It has instead become a mix of religious zeal, dogmatic control, deep superstition, and technological suppression, which has led to a long and slow stagnation. This is why even though captured plasma, faster than light travel, and even advanced laser weapons exist, but the upkeep and repair of these systems is steeped in quasi-religious ceremony, and when it breaks down past a certain level, people may not even be able to repair it at all. This is the sort of backward look at a future that's always really fascinated me.
No,
So-
I've always liked that concept. Actually, like when I was a kid, one of my favorite things to build with Legos was like a setup of a crashed ship of whatever technological level I so choose. If it had been pirates crashed on an island, or space wreckage crashed on a planet, I always tried to incorporate that into my little guy's base. Is that they couldn't rebuild everything that they had before. It was all built out of other things that I
bits.
had built. Normally it was I had been building something, I got bored of it, and I was like, all right, let's crash this, and then that'll be the new scenario that I'm playing with.
100% like all Lego. I'm just going to break it and start over.
Yeah.
While the Imperial Guard, Imperial Navy, Adaptus Sororitas, and many of the smaller administratum organizations are filled with mere mortals, the Imperium of Man is also filled with transhumans. Space Marines are genetically and bionically altered super soldiers based on a template designed by the Emperor himself. After the unification wars of Earth, he created the original 20 Space Marine legions, each falling under the command and gene seed, basically a genetic blueprint of a Primarch. Primarchs are gene-engineered demigods, giants twice the size of men, and second in power only to the Emperor himself. Of these 20 Primarchs and their legions, only 18 survived the events of the First Crusade. The other 2 have been completely struck from any existence in Imperial record. Each Primarch then commanded a legion, these legionaries sharing many traits from their gene fathers. These, now 9-foot-tall super soldiers, are being second in power only to the Primarchs themselves. Now we have Primaris Marines, which are even a further gene-tailored based on the Space Marine genetic itself, but we'll probably need to get into Primaris Space Marines specifically in another episode. During the Great Crusade, these Space Marines were frontline troops, supported by the might of the Imperial Army, and seeing an entire legion of them deployed was not uncommon. To give you guys an example, or for those of you who are currently reading the Siege of Terra books, the end of the Horus Heresy, they talk about the Iron Warriors assaulting the Lionsgate spaceport in the tens of thousands in 2 beachheads. So there's 10,000 guys on the ground fighting upward, and there's over 10,000 guys in the top of the Hive fighting down.
Space Marines.
Space Marines.
Jeez.
Iron Warriors. 1 legion of Space Marines.
Yeah, Space Marines used to fight on the same scale that Imperial Guard fight on, like on the daily.
They used to
Holy
be
shit.
incredibly common. Since
know,
the creation
Meat for the grinder.
Since the creation of the Codex Astartes, however, the legions have been reformed into chapters, and Space Marines have become extremely rare and are almost never seen, being used more in surgical strikes or in long deployments to far-off worlds. Now it's the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy that make up the might of the corpulent and rotting carcass that we call the Imperium of Man. The other side of the transhuman spectrum is the Adaptus Mechanicus, or the Tech Priests of Mars, who have a core belief that the flesh of humanity is weak. The Imperium is made up of 2 separate but equal organizations. Put most simply, this is Terra and Mars. While countless planets were settled by Terra and Mars during the golden age of technology, entire systems or worlds often hold fealty to one or the other. Most notably are Forge Worlds, which is the major power base of the Mechanicus across the galaxy. The priesthood of Mars has always believed in the Omnissiah, or the machine god, seeing the Emperor as a manifestation of that god when the planets originally became allies. It is most simply through necessity that the Emperor has continued to allow, or did continue to allow, Mars to keep this religious belief, even though he had planned his empire to be secular in nature. 10,000 years later, and it's pretty much only the Mechanicus that has any knowledge anymore to fix any of the ancient technology that keeps the Imperium running as it does today. Religiously obsessed with the concept of improving their own weak mortal bodies, most members of the Mechanicus are either willing to undergo cybernetic enhancement or have had cybernetic enhancements specifically placed on them based on how low in the social strata they are. For the rest of humanity, while the sciences of gene replacement, gene therapy, cybernetics, and bionics are available, it's generally only the elite that can afford to reap these rewards. The Inquisition, Sororitas, Imperial Navy, and Imperial Guard have greater access to higher technology as long as their rank remains largely how they get that technology. So a lowly guardsman is only going to be available to maybe get a semi-functional replacement bionic hand, as to where a veteran guardsman or somebody who's incredibly valued in the organization might get a full bionic arm. And then like an Inquisitor or somebody who's interacting with the High Lords of Terra might be 900-1,000 years old and, you know, have cosmetic enhancements, cyber eyes, cogitators in their brain.
Absolutely. Like Yarick, the Commissar Yarick, he's been rejuved several times, so he's at least 200 years old probably by this point. He's got a bionic arm, he's got a bionic eye, and that's purely due to his rank. They wouldn't waste any any resources on somebody who wasn't important.
In this book I'm listening to.
Mark's Book Corner.
And another segment
Check
of
that
what
box.
Mark's listening to. So in this book I'm listening to, there's actually a Imperial Guard commander doing trades with the rogue trader or with rogue traders. And what he does is he sends them into the warp to find like trinkets and stuff that are like super extremely rare or one of a kind. And what he does is he tells them to give him stuff, and he kills them after, so it can be a one of a kind thing that nobody else can get. So what he did was, when one of the rogue traders came back, they gave him an eye that could see literal light years away. And after he got that bionic eye, that is xenotech most likely, he killed the rogue trader, and he just keeps doing that. Yeah, it's crazy.
Hey, but if he was an orc, he'd find a way to go back in time and kill himself, so he could have two eyes that could see.
Crump him for the gubbins.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories is that there's an orc. There's an orc. When we get to our orc episode, we'll probably talk about him. But there's an orc that specifically went back in time. Accidentally went back in time and then found himself and killed himself so he could get two of his favorite gun. From an evolutionary perspective, there is a third type or a third category of transhumans, and those are psychers or witches, or any other mean name you want to throw at them. These are
Sting.
These are humans who are naturally able to tap into the powers of the warp, and they have been cropping up for the last 20,000 years or so. These mutations led to the psychic abilities which can express anywhere within the human genetic code. There are two major psychic mutations that we're going to specifically talk about right now, with the first one being the navigator houses. Navigators are highly specialized mutants, having a third eye that allows them to look into and then steer a ship through the immaterium. While the warp has given humanity the ability to travel faster than light, it's not a simple dimension to cross, nor is travel through it ever a guarantee. The navigator mutation allows warp travel with a degree of certainty, a much higher degree than without them. Next are astropaths, whose psychic mutation allows them to communicate with other astropaths across the warp. This secures faster than light communication for the Imperium. However, this communication system requires an astropath at each end, one transmitting and one receiving. Think of a cosmic scale game of telephone, with more accuracy in most cases. These are very, very brief looks at the transhumans and sanctioned psychers that do exist across the Imperium, and we will get into this stuff a little bit more in the future. In part 1 of this episode series, we looked at events that fell into date ranges of a single millennia. However, from here on out, events and timing get a lot more specific. To help, here's a small crash course on the Imperial dating system. Also, a small correction, this system is based on the Gregorian calendar, and years are actually recorded as AD, or Anno Domini. This means M40 is 40,000 years after 0 BC/1 AD on our present-day calendar. Let's dive into this with a quick look at a typical date. That might be 0.123.456.M41. In order, this breaks down to 0 being the check number, 123 being the year presented as a fraction, 456 being the year that took place, and then M41 being the millennium it takes place in. Check numbers refers to the accuracy of a given date, which is required for clarity due to common distortions of subjective linear time that occur when traveling within the warp, and inaccuracies in timing on remote or isolated imperial worlds or star system. Check numbers are listed using the following numeric classes. A 0 or a 1 means the event happened within Terra's solar system. 0 meaning it happened on Terra itself, and 1 meaning that it took place somewhere within the solar system. Basically, it means that there's only 1 degree of separation or no degrees of separation between the astropath communicating to the administratum and the event that took place. Class 2 is a direct communication. The source of the event and the date record was in direct psychic contact with the Sol system or Terra, and the date is therefore referenced as being removed only by a step. 3, indirect. The source of the event has direct contact with a Class 2 source. Class 4, corroborated. The source of the event of the date recorded has contact with a Class 3 resource. So now we're 4 steps out with astropaths. 5, sub-corroborated. The source of the event of that record is in direct psychic contact with a corroborated source. So again, 1 more astropath out. 6 is non-referenced and took place sometime within a year. The source of the event that this date record is talking about is not in contact with anybody between Class 0 or Class 5 when the date was made. though it was a continuation of the timeline that is based on that. So this could be a message that was delivered to an astropath that was then communicated, or it could be something that was written down that was found later. Class 7 is non-referenced within 10 years. Again, this is something that either arrived to an astropath or was found after it most likely happened. Class 8 is 11 plus years, and Class 9 is an approximation. So they're basically saying, we know this happened, and this is the approximate time we're guessing it did. This could be something like a ship disappearing in the warp during the Gothic War and then reappearing, and those soldiers going, oh, the Gothic War is still on, right, guys? And then they're like, okay, well, obviously, they experienced these events at this point. Year fraction is a little more obscure. Instead of using a month and day, the Administratum has decided to split the year into 1,000 parts. This is generally recorded between 001 and 000, 000 being when it resets after 999. Using math, you can actually use some of this stuff to actually determine the hour an event occurred, but it's worth noting that since planets have different day-night cycles and even orbits around their sun, or 1 year here is 7 years there because it's so close to a warp anomaly, this system wouldn't actually be used by Imperial citizens day to day. Even on Terra, citizens would probably still be using something that looked very standard to our concept of a Gregorian calendar with months and days. Also keep in mind, this is a fractional, this fractional year is actually based on a Terran standard year. This one's super easy. This is the year in the given millennia. So a millennia is a 1,000-year period. If it's 1, that means it's the first year of whatever that given millennia is. Millennia is last. This is the millennia since the birth of the ancient human religious figure known as Christ. As an example, the year AD 2000, yep, Jesus. Jesus term in Christ, right?
My man.
As an example, the year AD 2021 would be represented very generally with the imperial dating system as 021.M3. So it's the 21st year of the third millennia. This is also another one of those little details that makes the setting really cool and unique. It's taking something that we take for granted, something that exists in our world, and giving it that sci-fi spin. Makes it a little more alien and helps to kind of ground stories in the world. I know you had mentioned that a couple of the books break stuff up that way.
Yeah, most of the Imperial Guard books that I've read, a lot of times the chapters will start with a date and time designation. And so it'll be, okay, so you can actually see that either from the last battle that took place in the last chapter, it's been a day, a week, a month.
Right.
Or, sometimes, or it'll be like a flashback or something, and you can see that referenced by it actually having a date from previous, rather than having to pick it up off the context or them explicitly state that it's also one thing to note, like how you were saying that each planet would most likely use their own time scale.
Yeah.
I have in Imperial Guard novels, I also noticed that while they're in transit, as they get to the destination, they set the clocks on their transport ships. To match
like synchronized local time.
So they synchronize to local time. And that makes sense that they would all, as a fleet, do that. And that way the guard personnel are matched to the day-night cycle when they get deployed. But also that way the entire orbital fleet is on the same time schedule as well.
That makes sense. I think the other thing that you got to think is like on a void ship, these ships that travel from star system to star system, there probably isn't a day-night cycle.
Right. Yeah.
Like it probably goes.
They have a day-night cycle. I mean, I'm doing the finger quotes like all of our listeners can hear it, but
can you hear his finger quotes?
Finger quotes.
At the chime, the time will be.
And actually, they'll have. They talk about it like klaxons, like sirens to announce like the transition from nighttime mode where it's the lights are slightly dimmer.
Can you imagine how fucking annoying that would be? You're like half asleep because you had like third shift and a klaxon goes off for fucking day.
Daytime.
You'd be like, bitch, it is now 0600 hours. You're like, motherfucker. Got off work at 0400 hours.
Yeah, definitely. It would definitely be jarring, but it is worth to note that they actually do go in depth with
In space, no one will let you snooze.
So lastly, let's take a look at the galactic map of the 40k universe. The 40k galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. 40k takes place in our alternate future, and the Imperium of Man has spread into every fucking nook and cranny, even pushing at the outer edges of the galaxy in several places. Although a three-dimensional object rendered with the massive distance of light years, when humanity sat down to actually map the galaxy in the 40k universe, they did it with the idea of a 2D navigational map. So think about it as if you took a picture of the spiral galaxy, laid it out on a surface, and then decided what was north, what was east, what was south, and what was west. They generally use the Maelstrom, an ancient and massive warp storm, which pretty much sits just near the exact center of this map. And the other way that they anchor it is that they have the Eye of Terror, which exists in essentially the northwest of the map, with Terra and Mars roughly where the center of the western hemisphere of the galaxy would be, if you look at it as being about a quarter of the way between the eastern and western halves of the galactic equator. The Imperium then divides this map into segmentums, followed by sectors, subsectors, until eventually we get down to star systems and then planets. There are 5 major segmentums, with the segmentum Solar being centered around Terra and Mars. Segmentus Pacificus borders the segmentum Solar on the galactic west. Segmentum Obscurus borders the galactic north. Segmentum Ultima is the galactic east, and Segmentum Tempestus is the galactic south. We've tossed a link to a map in our show notes, so if you want to open that up, it might help to follow along.
I would have loved to have been in that conversation when they were like, well, sir, should we draw a map? Well, of course, we should put it on a map. Well, we've got 3D imaging, sir. Don't be ridiculous. Put it on a piece of paper.
Don't be ridiculous. Machines ought to be trusted. Write it down.
And the way that a lot of it works is that even though like a galaxy is a 3-dimensional object, we're a spiral galaxy. So the motion of our galaxy actually causes us to have an elliptical orbit.
It's
Yes, exactly. Put it on paper.
2-dimensional.
It turns
It's
into a
close
piece of
enough to
paper.
paper.
Put it on paper.
Put
This-
it on a
I
scroll.
mean, I would have just loved to have seen that. Like, they're like, well, sir, we have 3D imaging. But I don't care what we have.
And we'll get into why that might be a problem, because the Tyranids are not coming from the sides. They're coming from...
Sir, the Tyranids, sir.
They're not
invading.
listening to the map.
My
They're
God,
not
man.
following the rules of maps.
They're invading. Yeah, yes, sir. Do they want tea?
Tom, you're British is showing.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. That was the whole thing. Like, they're English, right?
The rules of maps.
They don't follow the laws of maps.
Bloody.
So to manage an empire this large, the Imperium is decentralized, allowing a local government to act in its stead. Organizationally, there is normally a planetary governor or parliamentary body who reports to a systems governor, who reports to a subsector governor, and so on. The Imperium is lax on the form of governments as long as the systems pay the Imperium tithe and adhere to the Imperial Creed.
So what you're telling me is the Imperium has layers.
Like an onion.
Yeah, like an onion. Layers.
The Imperial Tithe and the Imperial Creed are the last things we're going to touch on before we get into a couple of dates here. The Imperium Tithe is a tax paid by every planet that is aligned with the Imperium of Man, and the Imperium values nothing more than bodies.
Then you pay in your taxes.
Planets raise a planetary defense force for their own needs, and from these planetary defense forces, the tithe draws veterans into the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard then makes up the backbone of the Imperial war machine. The Imperium tithe can also be paid for in other ways, such as those serving penal sentences who might be turned into servitors, more about them later, they're awful, or who may be deployed to an agri-world in order to farm massive amounts of crops. However, it is for the war that the Imperium has its greatest need, and in many cases, the true currency of the imperial economy is counted in the number of bodies that you can simply throw at any given problem.
You know, I already don't like sentences. You had a penile sentence in that? I'm not about it, man.
Penal. not penile. Never mind. Yes, penile. He's a
Penal.
penile bone in the penile sentence.
Well,
Penal.
penal legions are pretty penile in their nature. They're getting fucked.
I like peanuts.
What do you mean we don't have any laser rifles?
Pistachios?
That's the
Got bomb collars. Good enough, right?
There's that story of the thousand Imperial Guard are all in a line to collect las guns, and Troop 999 gets his las gun, and then Troop 1000 walks up and the commissar hands him a Brune, and the guy's like, "What the fuck, man?" And the commissar's like, "We're all out of rifles." He's like, "Well, what am I gonna do?" "Well, when the orcs run it, you just shout pew pew." Then they're handing out bayonets. They get to the 999th guy and they hand out the last bayonet. The last guy's up there and the commissar hands him a rubber band. It says, "Wrap it around your broom." If an orc gets super close, go stabby stabby. And the guy's like, well, shit. So he gets sent out there and he's standing in a field, and sure enough, orcs are charging in every direction. He keeps turning around going pew pew, and orc falls down. Orc gets a little too close. He goes stabby stabby, and the orc falls down dead. And he's like, well, shit, why is this working? And then finally, like about an hour after the fight, this giant orc comes running over the hill. And he's like, pew, 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 pew. Nothing's working. Guy gets a little closer. He's dancing backwards. Stabby, 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 stabby. And then he hears under the orc's breath, tank, 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 tank. Smashes him in the face.
We did so good for a
That's
while.
orcs.
He did all right.
You did all right. Yeah, that's respectable
That's
for a guardsman
respectable.
with no
Very.
gun.
Exactly.
That's it. Again, but you know, as much as that's a joke that's actually written in one of the codexes, one of the things to take in mind is that that's how the Imperium deals with the problem. If they are on a planet and they're being overrun by orcs, say, and they're out of weapons, they just go, well, just send enough dudes at it with their bare fists to punch it, and it'll solve the problem. Or as the dude next to you dies, pick up his rifle. He doesn't need it anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, Billy? Yeah, you don't need it anymore.
No.
So the Imperial Creed
Billy
is...
doesn't need it anymore because he's got a fucking...
He ain't got no legs.
He ain't got no legs.
He doesn't need it because he's got the shotgun.
Billy.
Billy,
you
it's a storm bolter.
You ain't got
Now
no
it's a storm.
legs.
It's not a shotgun anymore? It's been like a month. How is it not a shotgun anymore?
No, it started as a Death Watch shotgun, and then it turned into a bolter that was pump action.
Yeah.
You know, at a
And
certain
then
point...
it became a storm bolter when he decided to add a second barrel to
Now
it.
it's like a
You know,
spaz.
I was going to say at a certain
Second
point,
barrel.
at a certain point, it's just going to get to the point where like, Billy, you're going to have to remake him from scratch because there's just going to be
You
so
can't do
many
that.
changes
You
done.
can't do that.
No, I'll
You can't do
have
that.
to.
No, you can't do that. You got to use the original model or the magic's not there.
You know when
That's
you
true.
you know when you
Although
start
I did, while we're on the subject of Billy, I in that Scions box, I got another Lord Commissar, and I don't need another Lord Commissar. So that leaves me
Put
with
that
a spare
shit in my
Commissar
hand.
hat
Oh,
that
Billy.
we could put on Billy.
Commissar Billy?
Yeah.
you know at a
Billy
certain
Badass?
point he's going to start playing chaos
Billy
and it's going to
Blackclaw?
be
It's
gonna be
Billy's
chaos.
revenge.
chaos
Billy-
spawn Billy because there's just going to be so many
It's
bits
gonna
on
have
him.
Tentacles.
Now he can hold 10 bolters.
Now he is bolters.
He's an obliterator.
More bolter than man.
So the Imperial Creed is a galaxy-wide state-enforced religion that sees the Emperor as a living spiritual entity or god who can empower his followers and grant divinity through his saints. While pretty much all variations of this core belief are tolerated by the ecclesiarchy, certain tenets are required. This includes, but are not limited to, unquestioning political loyalty to the High Lords of Terra and the various agencies of the Adaptus Terra, diligence in carrying out the Emperor's will, belief in the Emperor's ultimate divinity, and conscious contributions to the Imperium's overall well-being. This truth goes further in its efforts to obfuscate the existence of the warp, demons, the dark gods, and even the existence of certain alien species. The ecclesiarchy and the High Lords of Terra have also never been above the idea of using the Imperial Creed to exact vengeance against political or ideological opponents. For example, a planet might collectively believe in the will of and follow Roger. As long as those citizens see all the traits of the Emperor in Roger and believe in following the tenets of the Imperial Creed, the ecclesiarchy doesn't care if they accept Roger. I like to play with this idea when I worked on the governance and Imperial Creed a lot when I was doing the Skaldmere worlds. What are some other examples that you guys can think of this?
I know that the Space Wolves call the Emperor the All-Father or Old Father or whatever they call him.
Right, and
But
like the Mechanicus calls him the Omnissiah.
That's a little different.
Yeah,
So
that
the
is
way
a
the
little
actual religion is set up is that there's like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Right.
So there's the Emperor, there's the Omnissiah, and there's the Machine God. And even though those are all kind of the same, just like the Father,
Yeah.
the Son, and the Holy Ghost are kind of the same, it's a
I
little
thought
more.
the Emperor showed up on Mars and basically fixed some of their tech, and they're like, he fixed tech, he's the Omnissiah.
Right.
They
They
view
did.
him as the avatar of the Omnissiah.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
like he's like the
The
mortal
embodiment
representative.
or something like that.
So there's the Emperor of Terra, who is God, and then there's the Emperor who healed the machines on Mars, who is Jesus, and then there is the Emperor who is the machine spirit, who is the Holy Ghost. If you wanted to look at it like and apply a Catholic structure to it,
Right.
And jokes on them because the Emperor set it all up.
and then there's the Void Dragon.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I keep like Holy
What?
Ghost and keep like boogity boogity bless you. I don't know why. Boogity boogity bless you.
So never say the Holy Spirit around you. Always say the Holy Ghost.
The Holy Ghost.
Holy Ghost. Just rattling chains.
You guys are making fun of my religion. Right
I know,
now.
dude, I
appreciate
can't.
it.
I'm sorry, I am a dirty
I
pagan.
just-
Okay.
Just imagine that though, like I just think of like the Lego ghosts, where it's like, oh, bless you.
And it's really good because then you can just use the sheet to wipe your nose.
In fact, we just exercised some ghosts this last week on
Phasmophobia?
Phasmo.
It's
Yeah.
like bread.
I heard you jump and scream a little bit.
No, that wasn't me.
No, that
It's
was
like-
me. It was
'cause
100% me.
I just think of
Oh,
like
he's the
games-
one that got memeified. But
Oh,
sorry.
no, I got murdered over and over again by ghosts.
I just kept yelling at the closet door to stop opening. That's all. I was
Oh no,
Yeah.
I think I was the one that got mummified one night where I was like,
doing. They probably thought it was me.
they blamed Mark.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
probably.
always my fault. So
Yeah. No, I was just laughing because then I'm thinking like, oh yes, like there's the blood of Christ, the body of Christ, and the white sheet of Christ.
That's what the Shrouded Turin really is. It's
This is
just
the
the,
white bed
it's just
sheet
the first ghost costume
like
that was ever worn.
Yeah, I think of like Beetlejuice, like where they're like
Oh,
they're wearing
God.
like bed sheets, and they're like, "Whoa." I'm sorry, it's a serious topic. Go ahead,
It's a
continue.
very serious topic. I believe.
Board games are a serious thing.
We left off. Oh man. All right, so we left off with the emergence of the Tau Empire between M37 and M41. This is when the Tau became a minor threat and a very small part of the Eastern Fringe. Their empire sits near the galactic Eastern Fringe between the fiefdom of Ultramar and the Necron Sotek dynasty's territory. Picking back up with the beginning of the waning, which took place from M38 to 750.M41. During the early years of this period, the Imperium lost ground to both the orcs and chaos, as well as dealing with some of the sins of their own, like the Grim Harvest. Then in 131.M39, the Redemption Crusades began. This saw 5 great heroes appearing in each of the segmentums. These warriors were comparable to Primarchs themselves, and the Crusade managed to push back the enemies of the Imperium and expand its borders further than had been seen in the last 500 years. However, all 5 vanished after only a 50-year period, leading them to be named saints. And it is said that they were called back to the Emperor's side to fight his eternal war against the darkness. Over the past 9,000 years or so of history, we have mentioned several major incursions by the forces of chaos. Most of these were driven by or related to several of the Black Crusades. These were led by Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos. To give you guys an idea of who he is, when Horus was struck down by the Emperor at the end of the heresy, Horus's favored son and second in command, Ezekiel Abaddon, took command of the then called Sons of Horus Traitor Space Marine Legion. It was Abaddon who pulled most of the Traitor Legions or Chaos Space Marines back into the Eye of Terror originally, and it is Abaddon who has assumed the mantle of War Master of Chaos and who has stated his singular goal in overthrowing the Imperium.
Horus no War Master.
Is Horus still War Master? Horus is not still War
Horus
Master.
is basically obliterated from existence.
So the
So-
only reason anybody remembers Horus exists is because there were too many people around when he was deleted. But Horus was not killed.
Dude, the Emperor didn't have like a Men in Black peace out memory stick?
No. Horus was destroyed in a way that means that he essentially never existed.
So when the Emperor killed him, how did the Emperor kill him?
The Emperor didn't kill him.
Sanguinius did?
No, Emperor killed him.
No, the Emperor
I thought,
killed
yeah,
him.
I was going to say.
Oh, I thought
The Emperor did the final stroke.
The Emperor hesitated
Stroke?
for a little bit, but definitely killed
The
him.
final strike was done by the Emperor. So the Emperor hit him
Stroked him out, guys.
in real. He stroked out. The Emperor wouldn't buy him a fucking Space Marine, and he lost it.
He hit him with that. He hit him with that flashy light thing.
No, he hit him with he has the big flamey sword.
Yeah, so
Gilliman's got it now. But,
he hit him.
Yeah, it's like the
he
Emperor's
struck him in both the physical and the Imperium at the same time, and that combined it essentially deleted it. Like think of like the Thanos
So he
snap.
poofed?
He Thanos snapped.
So he poofed.
Forest.
yeah,
So he
Horus.
Cheeto poofed.
yeah.
Yep.
Dang.
Cheese a poof.
And
And then a boo boo came in and took over.
a boo boo.
A bad one?
So we'll
A
definitely
boo-boo
we'll definitely talk about the Horus heresy. We've gotten a couple of requests, so we'll get there. We'll touch all of that stuff later. No longer the sons of Horus, the Legion painted their armor black as a sign of mourning for the fall of Horus and became known as the Black Legion. It is under the command of Abaddon that the Black Legion has several times rallied the forces of chaos for their Black Crusades. These are conquests out of the Eye of Terror and into the Imperium. In 139.M41, the 12th Black Crusade, or Gothic War, exploded from the Eye of Terror and engulfed the Gothic sector of Segmentum Obscurus. This lasted until 160.M41 and was a crusade that saw war spill over hundreds of planets as the Gothic sector was obscured by warp storms and the will of the Chaos Gods. However, these warp storms eventually abated, and Imperial reinforcements were able to steam in and push the traitors back once again. But never to be underestimated, and with his eventual goals still obfuscated, Abaddon was able to destroy 4 of the 6 Blackstone fortresses that existed there and capture another, which he took back with him into the Eye of Terror. These are massive alien artifacts that were created by the Old Ones to be used as super weapons against the Necrons. They're basically like Death Stars, but they're capable of destroying entire star systems, not just planets. With such a weapon now deep in the Eye of Terror, it was possessed by a splinter of the god Slaanesh. We will get a lot further into Blackstone Fortresses, and since I'm a super old Chaos player, and I have Abaddon in my Black Legion army, we will definitely give him a couple of episodes in the future.
Does he have his arms?
He does have his arms.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's not the old metal one. I have the old metal model too, though.
Does that one have his arms?
Yeah, I pinned him.
You're like,
I learned how to brass rod pin real fucking early.
You're like, I welded those together.
Dude, there was a time where everything you bought for Chaos Space Marines was pewter. There was no plastic. Everything was pewter.
I was going to say everything was like that at some point.
So my old obliterators are pinned. Several of my old tanks are pinned. My old dreadnoughts pinned.
Does glue just not hold the pewter together?
Like over time, like
it just deteriorates pretty fast.
Just shove a brass rod in there. It's fine.
Yeah, it just won't stick.
And brass rods also help a lot with, like, if you're going to do any kit bashing.
Oh, because then you can basically just socket whatever onto it.
Yeah. Or like you guys, I mean, you guys have seen my Wraith Lord has, I took the sword blade from the Wraith glaive and I actually made it a fucking glaive.
Right.
Putting a brass rod.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And like the Toleron Rough Riders with the spearheads.
Right.
Those are brass.
Yeah.
That brass rod is
expensive.
Yeah,
Copper.
Copper's expensive.
Here in a couple of episodes, we'll do a hobbying as a 40k player, and we'll talk about some of the tools that we use and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Next up was the Makarian Crusade, which lasted from 392 to 399 M41, during which the Lord Commander of the Imperium Segmenta Solar, Lord Commander Solar Macarius, mustered the largest human army the galaxy had seen since the Great Crusade and set off to reconquer thousands of worlds in the name of the Imperium.
Crusade is
Hell
just
yeah.
me for WOG.
Hell yeah.
For 7 years, the Lord Commander led his crusade into the western fringes of the galaxy, expanding the Imperium into new, unseen worlds. However, upon his death, these worlds would fall into rivalries and eventually bitter civil wars. This was known collectively as the Mancurian Heresy, and it took the combined efforts of 100 Space Marine chapters to stabilize this entire region of space.
I thought you were going to say 100 Space Marines. I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad then.
So that was the interesting thing. You know, we've talked a couple of times off podcast about how many Space Marines it would take to take a technologically advanced world.
Oh yeah, we
because
did.
because the books are like, oh yeah, one. So
It really depends on which book you're reading.
so as I'm doing the Siege of Terra stuff, they're literally talking about like, oh yeah, I remember when I was deployed with the Iron Warriors, there were 10,000 sons of Dorn, 30,000 Iron Warriors, and 30,000 sons of Horus, and we could barely scratch the surface until finally the Khan arrived with 40,000 white scars. And I'm like, Warhammer 40k now is just a bunch of Imperial Guardsmen sitting around going, hey man, did you know that one Space Marine led the entire crusade? There was only one. It was just one guy. Every battle was just one guy. That's all I can think. It's just got to be Imperial Guardsmen being like, have you ever seen a Space Marine? I've never seen a Space Marine. There has to be such a degradation of their own history that when you think of things in 40k like perspective and in the 41st millennium.
Right.
Yeah, the huge decline of the Space Marines is definitely an interesting
It's just
concept.
like the whole rumor
it's
train, like as things go on, it's like 10,000 Space Marines, 5,000 Space Marines, 6 Space Marines.
5 Space Marines defended the whole
Did you hear?
planet.
I caught a fish and it was this big.
Did you hear this guy caught a fish with his ass cheeks?
Right, exactly. It's that
Well, and then there was what,
Well, I caught a fish and it was this big.
and then, you know, as Tom mentioned, I believe in part 1, another part of it is that there are several times in the lore where just 10 entire chapters were wiped out. If you think about it, a chapter is 1,000 Space Marines. So that's 10,000 dudes just died.
Yeah.
Like fighting against some Tyrians.
I mean, we're an Underhive radio show, so you guys mean ratfish.
That's right. Ratfish.
Ratfish.
Have you seen the 6-armed ratfish?
I've seen
weird,
them
man.
3-titted ones.
I've seen an 8-dicked ratfish.
Man, that's a lot of babies. So in 500 M41, the Imperium's mystics, seers, holy persons, and the most devout saw visions of the Emperor weeping. This became known as the Tears of the Emperor. Far from being isolated to a few backwater worlds, this event swept through the most advanced and populated of humanity's worlds. Regardless of these dreams or visions, all knew that the Emperor was not crying for himself, but for the fate of all of mankind. This brings us up to the Great Awakening, which just generally happened during M41. In the later years of M41, the Necron began to reawaken, taking up their need to rule and conquer once again. As we have joked before, every world is a tomb world. Many of the Necron tomb worlds actually had been settled by unsuspecting Imperial citizens, leading to horrific devastation against the citizens and the PDF forces as these Necron emerged. They either laid waste and slaughtered thousands or billions or enslaved entire planets, depending on what they wanted to do when they found people living on their planets. No one is quite sure why the Necrons have started to awaken now, but theories range from an Adeptus Mechanicus explorator fleet breaking into a Necron complex on a tomb world to the influence of the Tyranids' hive mind, which is an effect called the Shadow and the Warp. The first major contact the Imperium had with Necrons was during the conflict between the Tau and the Ultramarines on Melbeta, which turned out to be a tomb world. Finding themselves outclassed and caught unaware, Chapter Master Marnius Calgar called a ceasefire and allowed the Tau to withdraw before using an exterminatus against the world of Malbeta. This may have also been that catalyst which led to the reawakening of the Necron race. So exterminatus is not really a commonly used tactic by the Imperium, but it is in their toolbox, and sometimes they do use it as a last resort. But understand that an exterminatus condemns an entire planet, which is often used in some way or has some strategic value, to just being completely stripped of life. So if it was an agri world, it's now Iraq.
Right,
If it was a hive world, it's now Iraq.
They like if they had no, if they're like, hey, the consequences outweigh.
Yeah.
If losing the planet hurts the enemy just as much as it hurts us,
It's worth it.
Yeah.
I don't.
As opposed to
I
letting
don't
them
think.
have it.
I don't think that's how the Exterminatuses work, because the Imperium will quite often, like, as an example with the Tau, they'll completely withdraw from a system and just we'll be back later. We can't deal with this now. They're not going to exterminatus everything on their way out. They're just going to be like, we'll deal with this later.
Also, how hard they think it would be to retake the planet and a whole bunch of other. It's not just willy nilly, like, scorched earth. If we can't have it, nobody can have it. It's
not every time, but like if they're like, we don't have the resources to come back and deal with this,
right?
Or this is a new threat and we don't know how to deal with it. Or this is the 17th time that we've put down this orc uprising on this planet.
Right. That's right.
Or oh my God, the Tyranids are coming. I'm going to exterminatus 100 worlds in a giant ring around where they're attacking from.
Hey, that worked.
Not really.
It did though.
Sure. That guy did get hunted by the Inquisition until he was dead, but whatever.
He also managed to take a bunch of space.
He delayed them.
If I remember right, didn't he kill a Hive queen or something?
Yeah. There's a lot to that story.
Yeah. While he was being hunted by the Inquisition.
Can't even remember his name, but we'll get to him at some point. For 60 million years, the Necron have slept in stasis, awaiting to fulfill the order of the Silent King. This is to reconquer the entire galaxy in the name of the Necron dynasties. However advanced their science was, not all Necron have survived this long time in stasis. Malfunctions in timing devices or in their own code, meaning millions, if not billions, have never and may never actually awaken. While those that do may not have code that's fully whole, and some of that code may be corrupted to the point where those Necron are insane. Many millions more may not even have a chance to wake, with everything from Eldar seeking revenge against slumbering Necron worlds to the very nature of the universe itself working to destroy them. Stars have gone supernova, tectonic activity has crushed entire tomb complexes. Or a tomb world's orbit might decay into its sun, or that sun may cause it to have been flung out into the long dark of interstellar space. Some tomb complexes were also discovered by their inhabitants before they could start to awaken, with the either inquisitive humans or other Xenos races picking them apart and destroying or disassembling the sleeping Necrons just to see if they could unlock some new piece of tech. While once there had been a timed Great Awakening, it is now no longer synchronized. Challenges and factors have caused tomb worlds to awaken out of sequence, and some even far before the 41st millennium. The first tomb world to have revived did so in time to see the great crusade of the Emperor of Mankind begin to sweep across the galaxy, while others came online during the Nova Terra Integram of M34 or the Reign of Blood that marked the events of M36. Even now, most, possibly hundreds of billions, are still slumbering, each day drawing closer to their own reawakening. The most common side effect of a tomb complex's long status are errors in the revivification process, with the engrammatic pathways of the Necrons housed within them being scattered and highly fragmented, requiring months or even centuries to pull all of these pieces back together and return those Necrons to full function. Necrons have appeared in a lot of the lore before M41. It has always been something of one of the more horror-themed sides of 40k because they're fucking walking skeletons, and some of them are insane enough to drape their bodies with the flayed flesh of the victims they find.
Yeah, flayed ones.
Oh, yeah, they're fucking crazy.
Yeah, T800s. Arnie.
Right.
No, the flayed ones.
No, the flayed ones.
That's a disease.
The flare virus. It's a computer virus, or it's a Necron virus. So it's a computer virus, which basically makes them crave to be human, or not human, but whole again. So they flay the skin from their enemies and drape it over their bodies.
So Iron Giant.
Yeah.
Grimdark Iron Giant.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, the Iron Giant never.
He wanted to be Superman.
The Iron Giant wanted to be a boy.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I guess.
Pinocchio with a razor blade.
Robot Pinocchio.
Yeah, metal Pinocchio.
Edward
Chucky.
Scissorhands.
Oh yeah, Chucky.
Oh yeah.
Chucky.
Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah. They look like Edward Scissorhands. They act like Chucky.
Yeah.
More worrisome, even onto the Necrons themselves, are thousands of tomb worlds scattered throughout the galaxy that are made up of mindless Necrons. Their minds simply failed to make it through the long hibernation. Now they are nothing more than automatons slave to the tomb world's master autonomic program. These worlds, known as severed worlds, continue a loathsome existence in a parody of standard Necron protocol and existence. To further understand the Necron as a race and the revivification process, we need to look at how their bodies were made. Necrons are made out of a living metal called necrodermis, which contains within it the memory and engrammatic pathways. You'd think I played enough fucking Destiny 2 to pronounce that word, right?
Think so.
That help to establish their shape, purpose, and even personalities. During the biotransference, nobles and leaders received the most advanced bodies with the finest in necrodermis, which allows them to retain personality and even memory. Next, elite soldiers got the second best models, maybe maintaining extra bits and hints of tactical training and their memories, and possibly even some of their personality. And then it kind of goes all the way down through a couple more steps until you get average citizens. And they weren't as lucky. They were transferred into the crudest of mechanical bodies, and most don't retain anything of their former personality or memories. Tomb worlds are most vulnerable to some form of corruption or destruction during the revivification process because they send out massive energy spikes that lure in any race that just happens to be nearby. And since it's a long process, the armies aren't always what's woken first, or not necessarily what returned to serviceable duty.
So it's like a bug zapper, but it might actually not work.
Well, it's like a massive power surge, right? And then this program starts waking up the nobles, and then it starts waking up the people, the veterans. It doesn't wake up the rank and file. So all of the defense left to these canoptic spiders, scarabs, and wraiths, these constructs of the tomb complex that are supposed to protect it as everybody wakes up. You know, think you've been asleep for 60,000 years, 60 million years, right? You're going to want to take a long bath, right?
Yeah.
So while the Lord's taking a long bath, somebody else has to protect his door.
Now
You got a dog.
There is a one of the pharaohs, I think, who still thinks he's in the war.
Yes.
You know, like in heaven, right? Is that what it's
Yeah,
called?
because
Yeah,
like a
he's
lot
crazy.
of times their brains, like in this process, their brains may not completely fully.
Yeah,
click
like
back
he still
on.
believes that he's like fighting Catan.
Yeah.
And
he
his like
didn't
his number two, like I forgot what he's called, but he like hides it from everyone else. Like he'll go in and be like, "Yes, we'll defeat these Catan," and they're like, "What, sir?" And the guy walks up, he's like, "Nothing. Shut your mouth."
He said
Yeah.
Cadians. He
Yeah.
said Cadians. Cadian, Catan. It's real similar, guys.
Yeah.
Catanians.
Yeah.
Catanians.
Yeah, for the Emperor.
Yeah, four-armed emperor.
Four-armed emperor.
Three-titted emperor.
So one of the other things to keep in mind with Necrons with this entire process is where was I going? Oh, so there's Necrons that have actually been awake the entire time called Praetorians, but they can't be everywhere at once. So we'll get deeper into Necrons here in a little bit.
I think they're cool.
They are super neat.
Necrons
like the glow
are the king of get off my lawn.
Yep,
Yeah.
100%.
Stuff.
So if all
Yeah.
that goes, if all goes,
Cool. Shiny.
what?
What?
Glow stuff.
Glow stuff.
Necrons are all about glowy stuff.
All about them glows, dude. LEDs everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So if all goes well, the master program can either drive off or stall any invaders that might be called by this power surge until a sufficient number of warriors and the Tomb World's nobility can be awakened to take command. As younger races have expanded close to Tomb Worlds, it's actually tricked these master programs into basically accelerating their own timelines. The Sotek dynasty is a good example of this, as they were awoken by and expanded really quickly during M39 when the doomed to fail Ulamenthi started to colonize some of their tomb worlds. To an outsider, Necrons can be hard to understand, as some Necron lords will seek out diplomatic contact and others will just basically go into slaughter mode and murder everything. And then others will just become feudal lords or gods on super backworld planets because what they really want is to reconquer the entire galaxy as gods. However, the most common tactic of the Necron is brutal warfare, raiding for resources, planetary invasion, and genocidal purges of anything that's in their way. All of this, however, is a means to an end, and the reestablishment of the Necron dynasties is their true goal, as they just want to rule the galaxy again. Lastly, the absence of the Triarch and the Silent King, along with the unreliable and faulty awakening process of the Tomb Worlds, coordinating any efforts is near impossible. The departure of the Silent King and the dissolution of the Triarch left no clear path of successorship, and as a result, most of the nobles and leaders of the Necron have been left to their own devices and how to carry out this reconquest, with even Necron dynasties themselves coming into open conflict as their attempts to establish a direction or path come into conflict. That's pretty much what we got on Necrons, guys. Did I leave anything out?
Nah, that sounds about right.
Nah, that's the gist.
Old man, get off my lawn, glowy stuff.
Yep.
Get on my lawn,
Robots.
glowy stuff, spooky robots.
Old man has gas.
I like to tuck and ask if I'd fuck me and
What?
yeah, there's tuck disease. That's what the flayed ones. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Two tuck common? Pharaoh two tuck common?
In the time of ending between 744.m41 and 999.m41, the Imperium might has begun to wane once again, and humanity finds itself beset on all sides by Xenos.
Sounds like Tau propaganda, but okay.
Orcs, Eldari, Tau, Necron, and perhaps even harder to comprehend and address, the Tyranids. All the while, the threat of Chaos Traitor Legions and the rise of mutations and witches within the Imperium's own citizenry has threatened to tear the Imperium apart. Those most zealous to the Imperial truth lay the blame at the corruption of humanity itself, condemning those around them in what could become another zealous civil war. Meanwhile, astropaths have struggled to separate the noise of desperate people from the dire messages that are needed to keep the Imperium running. The Imperial Guard and the Space Marine chapters are at war like they have never seen before. Even during the heresy, great and unseen things stir in the warp, sending out ripples in the Immaterium like massive unseen predators just below the surface of some dark pool. The Neverborn have even begun to strain at the membrane of the Materium, threatening to break the thin layer of reality that keeps them bound into the warp. Surely, this is one of humanity's darkest eras. The emerging Tau Empire and the Imperium have made official first contact during the Damocles Gulf Crusade, or Damocles Crusade, in the Lysithus sector of the Ultima Segmentum on the galaxy's eastern fringe. The Tau attempted to establish diplomatic relations with the Imperium in order to bring them into the greater good. The Watercast was successful in several cases in establishing trade routes with Imperial worlds in this area. However, a century later, the Administratum grew alarmed by the expanding influences and readied a military response. The Damocles Crusade pushed into the Tau Empire, destroying several outlying settlements. When the Crusade reached the Tau world of Daleth Prime, it ground to a bloody stalemate as the high technology and pure numbers and unbridled ferocity of the Kroot proved enough to halt the Imperium on every front. By late 742 M41, after months of bloody stalemate, Imperium's Crusade commanders finally agreed to the Watercast's calls for some form of negotiations. However, this was largely so the Imperium could peacefully withdraw so they could switch focus to the approaching Tyranid threat of Hive Fleet Behemoth. Targarth, the Seer of Corento, gave this era its name in M45.M41 when he proclaimed the approach of the end times. His prophecies called for a time of unprecedented upheaval in which even the light of the Emperor would be swallowed into total darkness. Targarth was swiftly silenced and killed by the Inquisition for his heresies. However, at the moment of his death, his doomsaying cry was sent out and picked up by psychers on planets beyond count. Then, in 745.M41, the Tyranids first entered the galaxy and the Tyrannic Wars began. Hive Fleet Behemoth descended onto the galaxy from above the elliptical. We talked earlier about the Imperium being a map. These guys fell onto the map, smashing into the star systems of Tyran, which is where the Tyranids get their name, and Thandros, destroying and consuming them completely. From their angle of attack, the Hive Fleet next descended on the realm of Ultramar, the fiefdom of the Ultramarines, consuming several worlds and badly weakening the Ultramarine chapters. During this, the legendary Battle of Macraig stalls the Tyranid advance until the immediate threat of the Tyranids is ended under a withering fire and pressure of two entire Imperial Navy battle fleets.
So this is where the tyrannic war veterans.
war veterans.
Yeah, that's where they come from for like a special unit for Ultramarines, right?
Yeah.
Like veterans essentially.
Yeah.
So seeing the devastation surrounding the Imperial commanders across the Ultima Sanctum, they look at their own borders with a growing sense of unease. So with the information that we had just kind of covered, that was a lot of the stuff that had been introduced when the Tau and the Kroot had been introduced as playable factions. It was also around this time that the Necron came out of just that small set of like 5 warriors and started having a line. So we're talking about that 4th edition to 6th edition time period, which is where a lot of this, like there was the time of ending. There were all of these big events in the real world, in our world, as far as the game went. So that kind of gives players, a place of looking at how 40K has evolved.
Yeah, like a big point in time that affected the game, affected the timeline, kind of like the Fall of Cadia. Spoiler alert,
which is coming up, which affects 7th, 8th, and then into 9th.
Right.
Yep.
So yeah, as the game has progressed, as a rule set, that the lore has progressed, and we're kind of, touching on things a little bit more now in the 7th edition, 6th to 7th edition timeline.
Right. Personally, I think that's pretty awesome. Like, how many games do you know of that, like, board games or tabletop games evolve as you play? Like,
that's the whole reason I got into 40K.
Oh yeah,
exactly. Same.
Such a cool fucking setting.
We get to be a part of it.
Right. Yeah. You basically live the story as it goes. Like, I think we actually spoke about it in a past episode where they had a huge game that they played, and it affected the
storyline.
Exactly.
Well, all the battle. There was the Battle of McCraig box set that came out with a crashed Imperial ship.
Right.
I think you got Ultramarines and Gene Stealers in it.
Yeah.
Then there was a White Dwarf that had Battle of McCraig maps in it, Battle of McCraig missions in it. So a lot of this stuff that we're talking about fits in and slots into that stuff, and has real world tabletop play applications.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I mean, there's even for the whole like Damocles crusade.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't know is there was a book written about it, that the Storm Surge and the Ghost Keel were actually introduced, but they were prototype weaponry.
Yeah.
And in 40K, the Ghost Keel and the Storm Surge weren't released until 7th edition.
7th edition.
So in 4th edition and 5th edition lore,
prototypes.
they were prototyped, and all they had said was like a walking, cannon and a unit that couldn't be seen.
Right.
And then years later, there's now these 2 models that come out, and then you're like, holy shit, that was in a book 4 years ago.
And they'll also do a lot of things. Well, they'll be like, oh yeah, and then during the Tyrannic or just before the Tyrannic invasion, the Ultramarines were having these problems with the Tau, over on the Eastern Fringe, and this thing called the Damocles Gulf Crusade. Yeah, but then the Battle of McCraig, and then they'll develop all of that in like a 5th edition codex. And then, a couple editions later, they'll be like, hey, let's go back to that Damocles Gulf Crusade one-liner we dropped and expand it. Yeah. It's always fun to find those one-liners in lore and either expand them on your own.
Yeah, there was one in particular, I can't remember it now to save my life, but there was one in particular that was exactly that. Like, Dan Abbott was talking about it.
Yeah.
And he had said like, oh yes, it was this thing. And then like, years later, he's like, wait a minute, let's go back and talk about that thing. Like, what was that?
Now we have to develop it.
Yeah, he used the reference when he was talking about like Star Wars, and he was saying like the Clone Wars. And they were like, oh, back in the Clone Wars. And then years and years later, they're like, actually, let's make a movie about that. Like, and that's basically what Games Workshop does, is like, and even Dan Abbott himself, who, if you don't know, he's an author. We've talked about him before for the Black Library, but he literally will make up shit. And then years later, he'll be like, I said a thing. Let's go back and talk about that.
Yeah, let's unpack that, Colonel, for a couple minutes.
Speaking of Dan Abbott, I just watched his little YouTube video. Yeah, turns out he wrote the plot for Darktide.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, they did it like in secret. They just dropped the video.
A couple days ago.
48 hours.
Okay.
Legit. He talks about writing the story for Darktide, and he's like, "Yeah, we chose humans because Space Marines are boring." Essentially,
He also said
it's more real when you play.
He also said Magnus was a dick, right?
Yeah,
Magnus,
always
straight up.
Yeah.
So no excuses anymore, fellas. Sorry, he's a straight up dick.
Apparently, he did do something wrong.
He's a
so yeah, guys. We really hope you enjoyed part 2 of everything in the lore summed up, so we can go back later and expand upon it in future episodes.
You mean this wasn't part 10?
This was part 2.
Oh, God.
Just wanted to apologize that this is coming out a little late. We had some technical difficulties. Our cogitator, Kevin, pissed off the machine spirits.
Hey, I didn't do anything.
Wait, no, it was our cogitator, Mark, pissed off.
Servitor Mark over
Servitor
I
Mark.
I didn't burn the right incense. I
Yeah.
burned oil and I put incense and water.
So we had to call a commissar to beat on the unit a couple of times to make sure that the cogitator
He
could
beat
record
mine.
again.
It's because I wasn't here to put the fear of the Emperor in him.
Yeah, the beatings will continue until
Yeah.
morale improves.
So if you have any questions about the lore this episode, you want to hear us dive into any of the little tidbits that we've dropped, go ahead and email us at either underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com or grimdarkgaming@gmail.com. Both of those are in the description for the episode if you need spellings. You can find a bunch of information about us and other places to find us around the internet at linktree/underthehive. Again, that is linktree/underthehive. The link for that will also be in the show notes.
Yeah, should have a bunch of goodies like our Instagram, our Twitter,
Our OnlyFans.
Eventually,
our Patreon, and the best way to get in contact with us is to join our growing Discord community.
Yeah, we are actually active on that.
Streaming
pretty much 24/7.
Every day.
You know, we're I'd like to say that we're one of the few, but I think that's probably the best way to get a hold of us.
Yeah, and you can find one of us, jump into a game,
oh yeah, 100%.
video game with
I've
us.
been playing with some of the community.
Yeah, definitely. We talk about mostly Warhammer 40k, but we also talk about role-playing games, a little bit of Magic the Gathering, a little bit of just the
Tom
geek and
creator's other
nerd channel.
for RC stuff.
Remote control stuff.
Nerd and geek central channel stuff.
I'm also in
all
the
over
process of creating my own game.
Yeah. And we have started to write the lore behind the podcast. So if you join us over there, you can see how that process evolves and even help us make some decisions. We are currently holding a vote that will probably wrap up by next episode to figure out the name of our hive.
Right. Hence the whole radio show, talk show. We're, going live from under the
Radio
hive.
Underground.
But speaking of
Underground.
that's been all that we can bring you from Underhive ChemRat Radio 665.66 AM UHMR. We're signing off from sub-level 99 because holy crap, that's a pissed off Ogren and I think he needs a sausage.
Sausage.
Always remember, respect your local four-armed emperor because he might be the only four-armed emperor you have.
Enjoy that.
Four-armed
rats.
Three-titted Emperor.
3, 2,
All right, guys, have a good one. We will.
Ruby Rock.
That's it. That's as good of a sign off as we got right there.